Welcome back to the PCC podcast. And today we have a very special topic with a very special guest. This topic is definitely near and dear to my heart. So if you are somebody who feels like you need to focus on losing weight first and then building muscle, or you've been told that you have to cut and then bulk and then cut and then bulk, we're going to debunk a little bit of that with the research. So I'm proud to introduce Chris Barakat. Welcome to the show, and it's good to see you again.
Thank you. Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having me on again. And it's been a minute, so it's good to catch up.
Yeah, it's been like at least 3 years, I think, which is pretty nuts.
Yeah.
So,
Flies by too. Flies by.
yeah. So, I
Yeah.
think what I want to start with for sure is just giving our audience a little bit more about who you are and the credibility behind the research that you do and the knowledge that you're going to share. So, tell us a little bit
Sure.
about your background in this area of body recomposition and how you really dove deep into this field.
Sure. So I got my master's back in 2016 at the University of Tampa. That's when I started doing research in the exercise science field. And since 2017, I've been teaching there part-time and I've been doing research kind of full-time, kind of part-time since then, since 2016, 2017. And back in, I believe it was 2020, the paper was published. My colleagues and I put out a paper called Body Recomposition Can Train Individuals Build Muscle and Lose Fat at the Same Time. And that kind of made its rounds around the industry and made a lot of noise. And rightfully so, because that was actually the first time body recomposition was even used in a peer-reviewed, published scientific paper, even though it was demonstrated over the last 30, 40 plus years in the exercise science field. A lot of exercise science studies either focused on how much lean body mass or muscle did individuals build while undergoing XYZ resistance training protocol, or the nutrition studies looked at fat loss, and a lot of them didn't really combine the two.
Mm.
So I did like a narrative review on the field as a whole and basically reviewed all the data that already existed and kind of demonstrated that, hey, this does happen all the time. We see it in our labs in every single randomized control trial we do. Certain individuals recomp to very impressive magnitudes. Others might not recomp at all, but on average, we see it quite often. And that's been expressed, hundreds of times in the literature. And then obviously you have thousands of anecdotes where, okay, this clearly occurs. I see it with my clients all the time. You see it with your clients all the time. So that's kind of the scientific background on why I wanted to put out a paper on that specific topic. And yeah, it's something I'm super passionate about. And I think it is really important for most gym goers to understand that you don't need to pick one like just one out of those two goals of losing fat or building muscle. You can do them simultaneously. And a lot of people focus on the wrong things, or they give too much focus on things like scale weight, right?
Mm.
So we'll talk about that in more detail in a minute, especially for the females.
Oh, yeah.
Your goal can still be fat loss. And if you're doing all the right things, you will be losing body fat, but your body weight on the scale might not go down as quickly as you may like. And that could be a really good thing because that might just mean that you're building muscle simultaneously. So we'll talk all about that in more detail.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, I love
Yeah.
that. And it's actually cool to know the detail of how you didn't really use any new research in that narrative review. You just reviewed what was already there to show like, hey guys, like we might just be too narrow in our focus here. When we really zoom out, we do all these things together. It's already
Mhm.
happening. And it kind of drew this parallel for me that I realized like some of the biggest mistakes that I think a lot of women, especially that I speak with, make is they're placing all their eggs in the basket of just nutrition, or they're placing all their eggs in the basket of I just need to find the right workout routine and then I'll lose the weight.
Mhm.
When in reality, that's why we have like comprehensive solutions at both of our companies of nutrition, training, lifestyle, all the above,
Mhm.
because you can really make both happen if you have that holistic approach. So that's kind of a cool parallel that I drew there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then super quick, just to go back to the research, like another reason why this occurred was the 4 or 5 randomized control trials that I was a part of before writing that narrative review, again, I kept seeing recomposition occurring, but people weren't talking about it in the scientific literature. I'm like, what the heck are we doing? Like, this is, the holy grail when it comes to like fitness magazines or things that you see on social media in today's world. Like, why isn't there a formal peer-reviewed scientific paper on this topic? So that's how it came about. But yeah, taking a holistic approach is so dang important. And the beauty is the more T's that you're crossing and the more I's that you're dotting, the magnitude of your response is probably just going to be greater and greater, and you can make a more drastic response and transformation when it comes to body recon.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that that was honestly, I feel like the realization was almost like just as or maybe even more profound for me when like this all started coming out in that time frame before the first time that we interviewed you because I came from a bodybuilding background where it's kind of like you're already crossing a lot of T's, dotting a lot of I's. So it's like you are in this narrative where you have to cut only and then you have
Hmm.
to bulk only. And so that was a really strong narrative that I had that I felt at the time, 2016 to like 2020, really carried over to how I coached and a lot of my clients. And then now it's like, no, pretty much anyone that comes through the door, like we're going to see both of these things happen pretty much the whole time.
Yes.
But it's because of that difference between the cultures that I was in versus the lifestyle. So let's kind of debunk that narrative then as a
Yeah.
whole. Like, can you lose fat and build muscle at the same time, or do you have to pick one, cut and bulk and cycle through?
Yeah. So you absolutely can lose fat and gain muscle at the same time. That was something that drove me crazy too. Being in the evidence-based space, I would remember seeing like really simple infographics where it was like lose fat, caloric deficit, minus 500 calories, whatever it
Yeah.
may be. And then the one right next to it literally said gain muscle, caloric surplus, as if a caloric surplus was required. And like
Mm,
you had to pick one or the other. And this was being put out by people who should know better, who like are educated in the scientific space. And it's like, whoa, 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 it doesn't really work that way. So for fat loss, you do need to create some sort of energy deficit. This can come through a combination of your diet as well as resistance exercise. However, a lot of magic kind of happens at maintenance, and your body can use some of your fat stores to help fuel the energetic process of building muscle. So you can also kind of just recomp at around maintenance, where again, body weight might not be changing much, but your body is transforming quite drastically. And then when it comes to building muscle, this has also been well demonstrated in the literature. You can absolutely build muscle while you're in a deficit. What's more important there isn't a calorie surplus, but you kind of need a amino acid surplus or like a net nitrogen surplus, right? You need to be in a positive nitrogen
mm.
balance. So that's why one reason why high protein intakes are really, really valuable for maximizing muscle building as well as enhancing fat loss. Um, Maybe I'll just dive into that right now. So,
Yeah. How high protein are we talking?
um, okay, so I like using lean body mass more than body weight because everyone's body fat percent is quite different, right? So if I'm working with a Gen Pop client who's at 40% body fat, giving them 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight makes no sense.
Absolutely ridiculous. Yeah.
Whereas if I'm working with a female who's 25% body fat, I might give her slightly more than 1 gram per pound. So I like using lean body mass. My general recommendations there are a minimum of 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body mass.
Hmm.
But more ideally for recomp, I like it being anywhere as low as 1.2 grams per pound of lean body mass up to 1.6 grams per pound of lean body mass. And that works on a sliding scale relative to their body fat percent. So the higher body fat percent you have, the less protein you need. The leaner you are, you might get more benefits out of protein.
Hmm.
One thing I love about protein is obviously we understand there's 3 components to your total daily energy expenditure or your general caloric output. You have your basal metabolic rate, being the primary burner, so to speak. That's just how many calories we burn at rest. The second component of that is just going to be your physical activity levels, whether that's through exercise or not. So non-exercise activity thermogenesis or things that you're intentionally doing for movement. So just general physical activity. And then that last component is the thermic effect of food. So one example I like to provide all the time is if somebody is on a 2000 calorie diet and someone else is on a 2000 calorie diet, but one has a high protein intake and one has a low protein intake, their uh, energy intake versus energy output is actually quite different because the person on the high protein intake diet is burning more calories per day because of that thermic effect of food.
Yeah.
So they're tipping the scales in their favor, both for fat loss and muscle building.
Yeah.
So it's really, really important that, and that makes a difference. So like a lot of times we'll hear like all calories are created equal or some sort of saying or dogma like that. That's not true in regards to how it works physiologically in our body.
Hmm.
That's true how it works in a vacuum when you're asking what is a calorie and it's a unit of energy that raises water by X degrees. Yeah, okay, cool. But when we're looking at it from a physiological process, it doesn't work that way.
Yep.
So I don't want people to get like overly nitpicky, but another quick example, just to kind of demonstrate this is let's just say you have 60 grams of carbs from sweet potato versus 60 grams of carbs from Gatorade. Your caloric intake on a nutrition fact will look exactly the same because you're just doing 60 grams times 4 calories. So it's going to be the same, 240 calories. However, inside of our body, that sweet potato led to more calories burned because there was a greater thermic effect from that potato compared to the Gatorade. So there are things that impact how this works in our body and how it tips the scale of energy balance.
Hmm. Absolutely. And not even starting to scratch the surface of, let's say, that same sweet potato example, also the vitamins and minerals that we're gaining from it. How does that impact our energy and our mental clarity and our digestion to then behaviorally stick with the plan
Hmm.
better and better as well? So
For
I think
sure.
food quality is definitely not something to be ignored there. You said
Hmm.
something a second ago that I thought, like, first of all, I love alliteration, so it just caught my ear. But you said the
Hmm.
magic at maintenance. So
Yeah.
when it comes to losing body fat and building muscle at the same time, so let's say we put that high protein intake in place. I think something that a lot of clients just default to is, all right, now I got to be in a deficit, right? So talk about this
Hmm.
magic at maintenance. What is that, and why is it so important?
Yeah. So something that generally occurs is when we try to find a client's maintenance while increasing their protein intake, a lot of times they actually would report back to us that, hey, I'm actually having a hard time getting in all of this food because A, they're eating more whole food, higher fiber, less processed stuff that is just more satiating at baseline. And B, the higher protein intakes are keeping them fuller for a longer period of time. And they might not be used to eating protein in every single meal or having an adequate amount of protein, in my opinion. So, what happens in those situations a lot of times is their body weight does stay relatively the same. We do find what their current maintenance may be. And again, that caloric intake might be slightly higher than it used to be. So,
Hmm.
let's just say someone's previous caloric maintenance and intake was 2,400 calories. You take that same exact individual and you change their macronutrient intakes up, you now have them at 2,600 calories. That's still maintenance. They're not gaining weight and they're not gaining fat on a week by week, month by month basis, even though they're eating 200 more calories per day, because the majority of that additional caloric intake is probably coming from protein and they're just making better food choices, better lifestyle decisions, so on and so forth. So when that finally does take place, their satiety is improved, their energy levels are improved. So now rather than going into their workouts feeling sluggish like they used to, they actually feel a little bit more psychologically excited because they have more energy. They're then pushing themselves a little bit harder for potentially a little bit longer. And because of that, they're now creating a stronger training stimulus, which actually increases the adaptation response. And they have all the right fuel coming in to support the recovery needs. So they feel better, they're performing better, they're creating a greater adaptation response, and then they're recovering better. So then they start seeing positive things start to happen, which is improvements in strength, overall fitness, muscle mass starts to increase, and body fat starts to decrease. One thing, I don't want to jump around too much, so my apologies,
Good.
but one thing I think people really need to do is obviously taking body weight is a really, really important variable and important tool, but also take something like a waist circumference measurement. The frequency of that we can discuss in a little bit, but again, it's really, really empowering, and that positive feedback can be really beneficial to the individual, or it kind of keeps them on track if they see, hey, even though my body weight has stayed relatively the same, or I haven't lost as much as I wanted to, I lost 1.5 inches off of my waist, or I'm already down 3, 4 inches off of my waist. I'm cool with my body weight not dropping as fast as I want because my clothes are fitting me better and I'm getting some sort of objective feedback that something good is happening.
Right.
It's really, really hard to tell that you're building muscle when you're 30% body fat and you go from 30% to 28.5%. It's not super obvious to say like, oh, I'm really adding quality lean tissue to my body. However, that waist circumference is a really, really good tool that is giving you positive feedback right off the bat.
Yeah, 100%. And I actually think that's kind of a segue into maybe like a challenge from something that I've seen come up from kind of the body recomposition movement, if you will.
Mhm.
Something that I have seen more and more, and this is typically like on consults with clients, like first time meeting them, first time talking with them. And I ask, how much weight do you want to lose as a whole? I'm just trying to speak in their language because that's typically how they talk about things. Um, and so a lot of people, I get an answer something along the lines of, I'd love to lose, 50 pounds of body fat. But, if it ends up just being like 30 because I put on muscle, I'm okay with that too. And I typically always jump on this and challenged anyways, but I want to hear your take because I think the thing about building muscle, especially for females, is like how much are we really talking about relative to fat
Mhm.
loss and how kind of accurate is weight loss in pounds? Like, is that
Yeah,
example specifically actually feasible? Or because like what I'll typically tell them is like it'll probably be closer to the 50 than 30, if that's kind of
sure.
what we're looking at. But just kind of trying to get on the same page with the client because I don't want anyone kind of fooling themselves thinking I'm, I'm not losing weight, but that's okay because I'm putting on tons of muscle when that's not actually
Sure.
happening, right?
Sure, sure. Yeah. So it is going to be a slower process putting on muscle to some extent. It depends where the individual starts. So one thing I'll say is like if I have an untrained male that really hasn't had good experience resistance training, they can put on 20 pounds of lean body mass in a year, right? Like if they're a true, true novice. I
Yeah.
would say a female is about half that, about 10 pounds in a year, if they
Okay.
really don't have previous experience to that.
Okay.
Um, but one thing I wanted to mention talking about weight loss, where people usually miss the boat is their timelines of expectation.
Oh yeah.
So
Because you just said a
let's
year.
yeah, yeah. I just said a year to build the muscle. And I'm talking about weight loss and fat loss as well. So let's just take a 200-pound female. Let's say they tell you they want to lose 30 pounds in 12 weeks. Is that doable? Yeah. Is that the best approach to take? No, it's not. And then if they were to do that, they're probably going to regain it anyway.
Yeah.
So I do like that general rule of thumb of just aiming to lose 0.5 to 1% of your total body weight per week. So that 200-pound female, if they're losing 1 to 2 pounds per week, that's 0.5 to 1% of their body weight. That's a great rate of loss.
Yeah.
So a more realistic maximum end of the spectrum for that 200-pound female, if they lost 20 pounds in 10 weeks, that would be excellent, especially if they are resistance training simultaneously and they're recomping.
Right.
So yeah, I think a lot of people shoot themselves in the foot by being a little bit overzealous with what they want their weight loss goal to be in relation to the timeline. So
Sure.
something that people can try to implement is like, let's say they do want to lose 30 pounds. Sorry, let's use 20 pounds as an example. Let's take that in like 7-pound increments.
Yeah.
So let's lose 7 pounds and then diet break for a week or two, and then try to like teach that individual how to maintain that new body weight, increase their calories a bit, give them a little bit of a psychological break from quote unquote dieting as well as a physical break, lose another 7 pounds. So then you're down 14, diet break again, then lose another 7 pounds, and then you're down that 21 pounds. And then you can make the decision, okay, do I still have another 10, 15, 20 pounds to lose and you want to stay at it? Or do you want to change the goals and focus on something different?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, something about the rate of loss, because pretty much zero point 0.5 to 1 pounds uh per pound of body weight for weekly weight loss is I've
Mhm.
heard it honestly, it's becoming more and more like mainstream. Like people come to me and say, well, I've heard a pound a week and stuff like that. So it's
Mhm.
getting there. But I think too, like for some people who might find that rate disappointing, I think when you think about what's physiologically happening when you're losing 1 to 2 pounds on the scale per week, but then you're losing body fat and potentially putting on muscle, like the trade-off there is you could be actually losing more pounds of body fat than the 1 to 2 per week. In that
Yes.
example, because there's actually lean mass being gained in the process too. So I think just the waist circumference, making sure you're looking at other measures to really see the magnitude of those changes, because it's bringing it back to the beginning, the holistic approach is going to create such a higher magnitude of change when it comes to recomp versus just
Mhm.
focusing on weight loss when you're losing muscle tissue, bone density, and body
Yeah.
fat altogether. So,
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
yeah. So, okay. So then what are some circumstances where maybe we can versus can't expect higher magnitudes of body recomposition for someone who's starting out their journey?
Yeah, so instances where you shouldn't expect as much body recomp is if somebody's resistance training is really infrequent, even if their diet's on point. So let's just say you're somebody who's being very adherent from a nutritional dietary perspective. You can't expect to lose body fat, have your relatively, weekly rate of loss be in a good spot. You're not going to put on as much muscle tissue or lean body mass if maybe you're just training once to twice per week,
Okay.
which is still better than nothing. It's better than not resistance training at all. But
Yeah.
if your frequency is really low and your total volume per week is really low, I wouldn't expect to build as much muscle. But if you're somebody who's getting after it, 3 days per week plus, and you're actually progressing week to week, month to month, you're overloading over time, you should expect it. If you're someone who's training 3 to 5 days per week, but you're not overloading, you're just showing up and going through the motions, that's still great for your overall health and fitness, but your magnitude of recomp isn't going to be as great as somebody who is actually getting stronger over time, and not just doing the workout and burning the calories.
Mhm.
Right. So that's another thing that I train at a commercial gym. I train at a LA Fitness and I train at my home garage gym. Um, but when I'm at the LA Fitness, I'm around Gen Pop, right? I'm not around other competitive bodybuilders like myself, and I get to observe how people train, what their intensity look like, what their forms look like, and I unfortunately also see that a lot of people look the same kind of 6 months later, 1 year later, even though they're in the gym. And something that I see is they're training really, really far away from like concentric form failure, and they're not training at a high intensity. And they're more importantly, they're never tracking what they're lifting. They're just doing the movement.
Mhm.
And I think that's where a lot of people leave so much runway on the table for them to make progress is that they're not tracking what they're doing. And to me, that just blows my mind. So, as a quick example, all of us back in high school were like most likely forced to like do that 1 mile run in gym class, right? And everybody like knew what their time was. And if you're someone who jogs or you're someone who runs, or if you're just going to go to the track and do 4 laps, you're going to track like how long it took you to do that. And then the next time you do it, you're going to try to beat that time. And then the next time you do that, you're going to try to beat that time. And that's like the most obvious thing for somebody who's running, whether it's a mile or more distance than that. When it comes to like Gen Pop people lifting in the gym, when they're not tracking that they're doing 70 pounds on this lat pull down for 10 reps, and they're not trying to beat it the next week and the next month, they're shooting themselves in the foot. And that's where a lot of progress can be made, is just by ensuring that you're overloading by tracking what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you make it sound so obvious, but there's so much resistance to those behaviors of tracking, of logging, and things like that. Um,
Yeah.
and I think like you said, it's where a lot of people are leaving a lot of progress on the table. But I think it would be good to kind of go into like what are the T's to cross, the I's to dot, to show people like what could it look like though? Like what could the benefits on the other side of that look like? Because I think where that might come from in my mind is people doing what they perceive to be those actions of tracking, of logging their nutritional efforts, their training efforts, but because it was a fad diet method or something so extreme or something very neurotic, they had a negative experience. So they're averse to doing that again.
Mm.
But maybe what does it look like in practicality, let's say in your practice and what you see with your clients who are achieving recomp so that they can kind of envision a different reality?
Yeah. Let me see if I kind of got the question correct, but from a practical standpoint, on the nutrition front, it can look like a lot of different things. I kind of meet a lot of my clients somewhere where they're at, as
Yeah.
well as how extreme their goal is. So, for example, some of my clients just track protein intake and overall calories. Some clients track all three macronutrients pretty darn precisely. Some clients track it a bit looser. And then more serious clients have even more precise needs where we're now looking at nutrient timing and pre and post workout, stuff like that. So the practicality depends a little bit based on where they're at, their experience level, and what their goals are. Um, but I also try to find ways to get the client to understand how important it is to be a little bit more objective. So sometimes I try to get an idea of what profession they work in, what kind of
Yeah.
job they have, and then like what do they what fields of their life are they kind of forced to be a bit more objective? So let's just say somebody works in the financial sector or somebody works in the medical setting. I'll kind of ask them like, all right, where do you have to be objective, and how does that kind of guarantee your outcomes, right? Like, how do you use the objectiveness to quantify and predict what your outcomes are going to be? And then once they kind of get that, it's like, all right, well, we're trying to do the same thing with your training and nutrition so that your goals are attained for sure. It's not a guessing game. It's just a matter of doing it. Because it really can be guaranteed results as long as they execute. So it's like, how can we get them to execute? If somebody is trying to, increase their financial savings by X% per year, they're not just going to pray for that and hope that it happens. They're going to have some sort of objective plan in place, that's going to give them trust that this is going to occur as long as this plan is adhered to. Comes down to the same thing with training. So training and nutrition. So I kind of mentioned the nutrition looks different from a practical standpoint, depending on their goals and experience. And then the same thing with the training. But again, just logging their lifts, so important. Trying to get them excited about getting stronger,
Yeah.
um, even if that wasn't their original goal, right? Like their original goal is like, hey, I just want to lose body fat, look a little bit better, feel more confident, and improve my overall health. Not one of those goals mentions like strength and fitness and performance, But if we can get them to be excited about one lift per session that like they're motivated to progressively overload on, that makes it a lot easier.
Yeah.
And I think that's generally easy to do as long as you just kind of explain like, hey, let's just say they have previous running experience or previous experience in X sport or Y competition, or even if they're just like competitive in a different aspect of their life, whether it's like they've been climbing the corporate ladder or they've worked their way up from X role to Y role. It's like, all right, that same competitiveness that you had in that realm, like let's try to apply it to your training in some way.
Yeah. No, I love that analogy of like where are you objective and where can we apply that here? Because I could see that just really clicking for some people in like how
Hmm.
they've learned to process information, make decisions, things like that. Because I think a big piece of no longer avoiding paying attention to the data to see that kind of progress comes from really understanding why it's important and how it guarantees those results. But I think your answer was perfect. I think you completely understood the question of,
Okay, cool.
that where the protocols are depends on
Hmm.
where the client is at to an extent, right? Where how extreme the goal is. So it doesn't have to look like when someone's a bodybuilder and they're weighing out every gram of everything that they're eating, they even know how much sodium they have on a day-to-day basis. Like that is not what losing body fat and building muscle when you're 35% body fat needs to look like at all. And really just
Hmm.
looking at the least amount of data that we need in order to guarantee the most amount of progress, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, I'm curious to know, because I asked you something similar to this a couple years ago when we talked to you back in, I guess it would be 2021.
Hmm.
But more research has been pursued and has come out since then. So I'd love to know your take on, are there any situations where you should not expect to see body recomp in terms of like certain types of people, certain situations where it's actually more practical to bulk or cut or do something like that?
Hmm. Yeah, I wouldn't even say this is necessarily from the research that's come out over the last 3 years because that hasn't changed much in terms of like, well, what's realistic to expect or how I put things into practice.
Hmm.
But just generally speaking, it's going to be if somebody is already highly trained and they've already been crossing their T's and dotting their I's, um, it would make more sense for that individual to pick one goal and be a little bit more phasic, where it's like, okay, I'm going to be in a surplus for X amount of months because I'm really focused on maximizing performance, maximizing muscle gain, whatever it may be. And then down the road, I'm going to intentionally get into a deficit. The primary goal is going to be fat loss while maximizing muscle retention rather than like quote unquote recomping. Um, and that can just be based on their timelines and their specific goals. But there's really nothing like novel that their research has put out. Um, it's going to be very individualized and very goal specific. So there are going to be certain phases where a caloric surplus is going to serve you better, depending on what your goals are. Again, so if it's really, really performance based, you're really excited to get as strong as possible, or you have some sort of competition coming up that's performance based, stuff like that. But otherwise, there's really nothing else to kind of mention.
Hmm. Okay. So
Yeah.
yeah, really just those kind of more advanced athletes, people in that bodybuilding sector who have really been doing this for a while and are managing all those variables, which I think the longer we've been in the coaching space, the more and more we realize like that's really not anybody that we're working with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it's not like even for myself real quick, I'll say that like I've decomped and recomped over and over the
Yeah.
last, you know, 6 years.
Yeah.
So because I've been doing this for so long, I am super close to like I'm closer to my genetic limit than most Gen Pop people, obviously.
Hmm.
So I kind of see these fluctuations where like I decomp and recomp, and my body weight doesn't change too much, but like my physique looks quite different depending on how meticulous I'm being with my nutrition and how much time I'm spending in the gym, how much volume I'm doing on a weekly basis. So I kind of have these maintenance periods where I take my foot off the gas. You know, I'm a father now, so I've been spending a lot of time with my newborn and just enjoying like a new chapter of my life.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, like I plan on competing next year. So since September, I've really kind of kicked it up a notch. And even though I'm an advanced pro natural bodybuilder, I've recomped because months prior to that, I kind of decomped, right? So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's something that you're going to see kind of happen over time for a lot of different people.
Yeah, I love that. I've definitely seen similar things within myself too. And I think that's honestly something that's different than a couple years ago when we last talked, was like really just recognizing that in ourselves. Whereas I think in that prior season, we were both very entrenched in bodybuilding with it's
Hmm.
prep time, it's off season time and things like that. So um all right. Well, I think I really just have one more question. Um,
Sure.
for maybe the person who's listened to all of this and they're like, cool, 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 but like my doctor said I should focus on weight loss first and then put on
Hmm.
muscle. So any last kind of words in terms of warnings or words of wisdoms against that sort of a focus when it comes to, okay, I'm only going to diet, I'm only going to do cardio, and then I'll start lifting weights because I don't want to get bulky in this recomposition process.
Yeah, in regards to that person that was basically told that they should focus on weight loss and fat loss, they absolutely can. I think they just need to understand what an appropriate rate of loss is going to look like for them. They can be in this quote unquote calorie deficit if that is their primary goal, and that's going to kind of maximize their health outcomes for the short term. Um, as long as they also know that, hey, if I'm resistance training and I'm progressing and my protein intake is where it needs to be, I should also expect to gain muscle simultaneously. And the beautiful thing about that is that their basal metabolic rate can actually go up over time. So, something that happens if you just lose weight without resistance training and without building muscle, your basal metabolic rate is going to go down over time. And that is one reason why the weight regain is so easy to occur. Whereas when we have individuals that are progressing in the resistance training side of the spectrum, doing everything they need to do on the dietary front, their basal metabolic rate can actually go up, even though they're at a significantly lighter body weight. So earlier on this call, I think I used 2,400 calories as a random example of someone's maintenance. And then I said, you can take that same individual and put them on a 2,600 calorie diet that's higher protein. And now that's their new maintenance. That same person 12 weeks from now, let's just say they lost body fat and gained muscle, their new maintenance might be 2,800 calories. So they might be eating 400 more calories on a daily basis than they were just 3 months ago. They're lighter, they're leaner, they have more muscle, and they're eating more. And because of that, they are going to feel better. You know, when you're eating more calories per day, not only are you getting in more macronutrients, you're getting in more micronutrients. So cognitive function can be better. Um, Hormonal systems can be a bit more in sync with one another. So maybe thyroid function is better, sex hormones are better. So yeah, there can be a lot of benefits outside of the physical transformation and the physique, but internally and under the hood, a lot of other things can improve for them. And yeah, it can be really, really drastic general health transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. From actually eating more rather than less, which is a narrative that I love because it really is, I mean, possible for a lot of these women, especially who have been eating like 1,200 calories a day for however long.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, well above that is really the baseline, and then we can even increase from there, is what I'm hearing too. So,
Yeah. Yeah, no, super cool. There was one gentleman I worked with a couple of years ago. Again, I work with a lot of competitors myself, and then some of the other people on my team work with Gen Pop. I work with a few Gen Pop people here and there now, but I worked with a Gen Pop person a couple of years back, male, and he actually gained 13 pounds of scale weight in, I believe, a 14-week period or so. Um, but his DEXA scan results showed that, sorry, he gained 7 pounds of scale weight,
mm,
but he gained 13 pounds of lean mass and
wow,
dropped like 5 or 6 pounds of fat mass
awesome.
throughout that time period. Yeah. So, and he started off light, like he was only maybe 160-ish pounds to start. He was an older gentleman around 51-ish years of age. So again, this isn't like a 30-year-old. Still was able to gain a lot of muscle. And yeah, just completely not only transformed his physique, but his health markers looked way better. His cholesterol improved, his triglycerides improved, his fasting blood glucose levels, all that stuff got better. So it's really exciting to work with Gen Pop people because their room to progress is so
Oh,
large.
yeah.
Whereas when I'm working with these really advanced physique athletes, it's like, yeah, we're gonna see changes, but they're not gonna gain 13 pounds of lean mass and lose 6 pounds of fat mass in like a short time period. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's really, really cool to see that. But yeah, everyone going into the new year, obviously, like a lot of people are very, very focused on weight loss and fat loss. I like being specific with the goal, so I'd rather people just label it fat loss and not weight loss, and understand that they're just trying to improve body composition, and then they're kind of checking off those boxes that will lead them down that route and lead them to that positive outcome.
Absolutely. Well, and the language we use matters for what we actually are focused on. So I think that that is a great distinction there too. So
For
awesome.
sure.
Well, Chris, what do you have going on? Make your plug for whatever is going on for you and where the people
Sure.
can find you and all of that stuff.
Yeah, something I'll plug really quick is it's an old nutrition guide I put out, but it's really, really beneficial. So, that's called the Ultimate Guide to Body Recomposition. I'll just set a discount code for the listeners here, so I'll just make it PCC,
Perfect.
and I'll give them 25% off for that. And that's just a nutrition guide that kind of walks people through how I set up somebody's diet and how I adjust their diet over time. And yeah, how can they kind of optimize their nutrition for recomp? And then everything else, I'm not super active on social media anymore, but you guys can find me at Christopher.Barakat on Instagram. You can also go to my website, schoolofgainz.com. Gains is spelled with a Z. If you have any questions, you feel free to reach out to me through the site. Yeah, reaching out through the site is a little bit better than DMs because DMs kind of get all over the place. So yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Marissa. Look forward to chatting with you again in the future and wishing you a happy and healthy holiday season.
Yeah, and a happy new year to you too. Awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you guys.